Green Berets joked about single dad librarian until they found his file. Most classified kills ever, they laughed at the quiet man shelving books. Until one secret file exposed. He wasn't just a librarian. He was the ghost every soldier whispered about. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of Crestwood Public Library, casting warm rectangles across the worn carpet. Jack Ellison reached up to the highest shelf, his movements precise and gentle as he guided each book into its proper place. Behind him, 8-year-old Lily clutched a stack of children's novels to her chest, her small face scrunched in concentration as she read the call numbers. "Here's another one for the top shelf, Dad," Lily said, holding up a thick volume with a colorful spine. Jack took the book with a soft smile. "Thank you, sweetheart. You're getting pretty good at sorting these. Mrs. Chen says I'm the best helper in 3rd grade. Lily beamed, revealing a gap where her front tooth used to be. From across the library, hearty laughter erupted from the cafe area. Jack glanced over, catching sight of the regular morning crowd. 4 elderly veterans who'd claimed the corner table as their unofficial territory. Tom Harris, their unofficial leader, was gesturing animatedly while telling what appeared to be another war story. And there we were, knee-deep in mud. Tom's voice carried across the quiet space. Buck Jensen slapped the table, nearly spilling his coffee. "That reminds me of the time in '69 when, 'Keep it down, fellas,' called Mrs. Chen from the circulation desk, though her admonishment held more affection than authority. The veterans had been fixtures at the library for years, as reliable as the morning sun. Jack returned to his task, methodically working his way down the cart of returns. Each book found its home under his careful hands, a small act of creating order in the world. A young patron approached, clutching a picture book. "Mr. Ellison?" The little boy shifted from foot to foot. "Can you help me find more dinosaur books?" "Of course, Tommy." Jack's voice was quiet but warm. "Let's see what we can discover." As Jack led Tommy toward the children's section, another burst of laughter echoed from the cafe. "Ray Sarge," Monroe's gravelly voice cut through the air. "Hey, Bookworm Commander. You ever gonna join us for coffee? Or are those shelves too exciting?" Jack merely nodded politely in their direction, maintaining his composure. He'd grown used to their good-natured ribbing over the past few months since taking the librarian position. Eddie Alvarez, the most observant of the group, watched Jack with thoughtful eyes. Unlike his companions, he seemed to sense something beneath Jack's peaceful exterior. Later that morning, Jack paused at his desk, his hand lingering on the silver frame that held Sarah's photograph. His late wife's smile seemed to glow in the sunlight, her eyes bright with the same warmth he saw every day in Lily's face. The ache in his chest was familiar now, like an old friend he'd learned to live with. "She was really pretty," Lily said softly, appearing at his elbow. She'd inherited her mother's gentle way of moving, quiet as a shadow. Jack wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders. Yes, she was. Inside and out. The veterans' voices rose again, this time accompanied by the scraping of chair legs against the floor as they adjusted their seats. Buck's voice carried clearly. "Look at him over there, arranging books like they're made of glass. Bet he's never seen a day of real action in his life." "Now, Buck," Eddie cautioned, but his words were drowned out by Tom's chuckling. Lily's small face clouded. "Dad, why do they make fun of you?" Jack knelt down to meet his daughter's eyes, noting the protective anger in her expression. His heart swelled with love for this fierce little girl who wanted to defend him. "Sometimes people laugh at what they don't understand," he said gently. "It doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means they see the world differently than we do." "But you're not soft," Lily protested. "You're the strongest person I know." Jack kissed the top of her head. "There are many different kinds of strength, sweetheart. The kind that matters most is the strength to be kind, even when others aren't." The day passed in its usual rhythm of story times, reference questions, and quiet conversations with patrons. Jack moved through it all with steady patience, his presence as constant and reassuring as the library itself. He helped elderly Mrs. Patterson find large print mysteries, showed a teenager how to use the research databases, and listened to a young mother's concerns about her child's reading level. As closing time approached, the veterans gathered their coffee cups and newspapers, shrugging into their army jackets with practiced ease. They moved as a unit, even after all these years, their camaraderie evident in every shared joke and casual shoulder pat. Jack stood by the tall windows, watching as they made their way across the parking lot. Tom led the way, his green beret pin catching the last rays of sunlight. Ray followed, his posture still military straight, despite his age. Buck gestured wildly, probably sharing another story, while Eddie brought up the rear, his thoughtful gaze turning back toward the library for a moment. They walked in step without seeming to realize it, 4 old soldiers sharing one more march together. Jack watched them go, his expression calm and unreadable, but behind his eyes lay depths of understanding they couldn't imagine. He understood their laughter, their need to maintain the identity that had defined them for so long. He understood because he carried his own definition of service, one that now found its expression in quiet ways, in carefully shelved books, in gentle words, in workin', creating a safe harbor for his daughter. The ache behind his eyes remained private, a weight he carried alone. But there was peace in this new life he'd built, a different kind of purpose than the one he'd known before. As the veterans disappeared around the corner, their laughter fading into the evening air, Jack turned back to his library, ready to close up for another day. The next morning brought another crisp autumn day to Crestwood. The veterans claimed their usual spot in the library cafe, their coffee cups creating rings on the wooden table. Tom Harris, his silver hair neatly combed, held up a bright yellow flyer that had been posted on the bulletin board. "Look at this, fellas," Tom said, squinting at the paper. "Library's hosting some kind of veterans benefit next week. Guest speakers, refreshments, the whole 9 yards. Ray, the youngest of the group at 62, snorted. Bet they'll serve those tiny sandwiches with the crusts cut off. Yeah, and that librarian'll probably read us The Cat in the Hat," Buck added, his weathered face creasing with laughter. Tom shook his head, his expression a mix of amusement and something deeper. Guy doesn't know the first thing about serving. Probably thinks war is just like those history books he's always dusting. Jack appeared then, pushing a cart of reference materials. His pressed shirt and quiet demeanor were a stark contrast to the veterans' worn army jackets and boisterous manner. "Good morning, gentlemen," he said, nodding politely. "I see you found our flyer for the benefit." Instead of letting their comments sting, Jack began unloading books onto a nearby table. "Actually, I was hoping to get your input. We're setting up a military history corner for the event. Your expertise would be invaluable." The veterans exchanged glances, caught off guard by his genuine request. Tom cleared his throat. "Well, I suppose we could take a look." As Jack led them to a corner near the reference section, Lily skipped up with a large piece of construction paper in her hands. "Daddy, I made this for the special corner." She held up her artwork, an American flag drawn with careful attention to detail, each stripe evenly spaced, the stars arranged in neat rows. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Jack said, his eyes soft with pride. He turned to the veterans. "What do you think, gentlemen? Would this make a good centerpiece?" Tom studied the drawing, his expression softening. "Kid's got talent," he admitted. "Stars are in proper formation and everything." As they discussed the layout of the military history corner, a young man in army fatigues approached the reference desk. His posture was military straight, but his eyes held the slightly lost look of someone searching for something specific. "Can I help you find anything?" Jack asked, his attention immediately shifting to the visitor. "Yes, sir," the soldier replied. "I'm Private Darren Brooks. I'm looking for information on Afghanistan operations, particularly in the eastern provinces." Of course, Jack moved with fluid efficiency to a section of maps spread across a reference table. "Are you interested in particular years or regions?" 2008 to 2010, sir. Specifically around the Kunar province." Jack's fingers traced the topographical lines of a map with practiced ease. The terrain here made operations particularly challenging, he explained, his voice steady and knowledgeable. These valleys created natural bottlenecks, while the elevation changes affected everything from radio communications to supply routes. Private Brooks watched Jack's movements, his eyes narrowing slightly as Jack detailed the tactical considerations of various regions. The librarian's explanations were precise, his understanding of military strategy seemingly too detailed for someone who just read about it in books. The young soldier's attention shifted from the maps to Jack's face, studying him with growing intensity. Jack continued his closest explanation, either not noticing or choosing to ignore the scrutiny. These passes here, Jack said, pointing to a particular region, were crucial for— Sir, Darren interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. Have you served? Jack's hand stilled on the map for just a moment before he straightened up. Let me show you where you can find more detailed resources on the region, he said, smoothly changing the subject. As Jack walked toward the military history section, Private Brooks remained rooted in place, his face a mask of disbelief. He pulled out his phone and glanced at a photo he had saved, then back at Jack's retreating form. No way, he whispered to himself, shaking his head. That can't be him. Without another word, Private Brooks hurried toward the library exit, his phone already pressed to his ear as he pushed through the double doors. Back at the military history corner, Lily carefully hung her flag drawing while the veterans grudgingly offered suggestions about book arrangements. Jack returned to find Tom examining a volume on Desert Storm. Not bad, Tom admitted, though he couldn't quite meet Jack's eyes. For a civilian's collection, that is. Jack just smiled, continuing to arrange books with the same quiet precision he applied to everything else. The autumn breeze carried the sound of laughter and chatter through the library's open doors. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the entrance, and a hand-painted banner proclaimed Veterans Appreciation Day, in careful strokes Lily's artistic contribution to the event. Inside, Jack moved with his usual quiet efficiency between the children's reading area and the main hall. He adjusted the microphone stand, straightened name tags, and made sure every detail was perfect. His calm demeanor never wavered, even as he caught snippets of the veterans' conversations from their corner. At least he's trying, Tom muttered, adjusting his army jacket's collar. The other, retired. Green Berets nodded half-heartedly, their usual bravado subdued by the formal atmosphere. Lily darted between the tables, her pigtails bouncing as she distributed handmade bookmarks. Each one sparkled with gold glitter paint, carefully shaped like military medals. These are for being brave, she told each veteran with a bright smile. Even the most hardened faces softened at her earnest delivery. Thank you, sweetheart, Buck said, accepting his bookmark with unexpected gentleness. He turned it over in his weathered hands, treating the simple craft project like a real commendation. The library filled steadily as local families arrived. Jack's voice carried clearly as he read to a group of children, bringing to life tales of courage and friendship. His storytelling held them spellbound, their eyes wide, as he acted out different character voices. The peaceful scene shattered when Private Darren Brooks burst through the doors, clutching a worn manila folder to his chest. His face was flushed, and he made straight for the veteran's corner, barely acknowledging the startled looks from nearby patrons. You won't believe what I found, Darren whispered urgently, pulling up a chair. The folder trembled in his hands as he glanced over his shoulder toward Jack. I was organizing old files at the base when I saw it. Top secret clearance. Restricted access. Tom leaned forward. Coffee forgotten. What are you talking about, son? Darren's voice dropped even lower. There's this legendary operative they called Ghost Hand. Highest confirmed eliminations in covert operations history. The file's been classified for years, but the photo inside. He swallowed hard. It's him. It's Jack Ellison. The veterans exchanged incredulous looks. Ray actually laughed, though it died quickly at Darren's serious expression. You're saying our bookworm librarian is some kind of super soldier? Buck finished, his voice thick with disbelief. Eddie shook his head. No way. That quiet guy who reads kids' stories? But Darren was already opening the folder, careful to shield its contents from public view. The men huddled closer, their expressions changing as they studied the photograph within. The younger man in the image wore combat gear, his face leaner and harder, but the eyes, those same calm, knowing eyes, were unmistakable. They found Jack by the reference section, reorganizing military history books. The change in their demeanor was instant gone, was the casual dismissal, replaced by a strange mix of awe and uncertainty. Ellison, Tom said, his voice gruff with emotion. We need to talk. Jack's hands stilled on the books. He turned slowly, his eyes falling on the folder in Darren's grip. Something flickered across his face, not anger or fear, but a deep, resigned sadness. That file wasn't meant to be found, he said quietly. The simple statement carried weight, heavy with unspoken history. The whispers started immediately. Library patrons who had proud of said, overheard began spreading the word. Jack Ellison, the gentle librarian, was actually a legendary military operative. The murmurs rippled through the crowd like waves, growing with each retelling. Lily appeared at her father's side, sensing the tension. She slipped her small hand into his, looking up at him with complete trust. Jack squeezed her hand gently, drawing strength from her presence. The veterans stood awkwardly, their earlier mockery forgotten. The proof in their hands had shattered their assumptions, leaving them struggling to reconcile the deadly operative from the file with the peaceful man before them. Jack faced them squarely, his posture straight but not rigid. His voice, when it came, was steady and clear enough to carry to those nearby. You have your stories, he said, meeting each veteran's eyes in turn. I have mine. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Their usual chatter hushed. The revelation hung in the air, changing everything and nothing at once. The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon when Tom, Ray, Buck, and Eddie made their way to the library. Their boots scraped against the concrete steps, each step heavier than usual. Through the glass doors, they could see Jack methodically wiping down tables, his movements precise and purposeful in the dim light. Buck shifted uncomfortably, jingling his car keys in his pocket. Maybe we should come back later, he mumbled, but Eddie placed a steady hand on his shoulder. No, amigo, we do this now. Ray pulled out his ring of keys he had access as a library volunteer and unlocked the door. The familiar scent of books and coffee welcomed them, along with the soft hum of the heating system coming to life. Jack looked up from his work, his face showing neither surprise nor resentment. He simply nodded and continued wiping down the last table. Coffee's fresh if you'd like some, he said quietly. Tom cleared his throat, his flamed, usual commanding presence diminished by the weight of remorse. Jack, we didn't come for coffee. He glanced at his companions, who nodded encouragingly. We came to apologize. What we did, the teasing, the assumptions, it wasn't right. Weren't just wrong, Buck added, his typical joking manner replaced by genuine contrition. We were being real jerks about it. Jack set down his cleaning cloth and turned to face them fully. The morning light filtering through the windows cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the quiet dignity in his expression. You don't need to apologize, he said softly. Yes, we do, Ray insisted, his weathered face creased with sincerity. We judged without knowing. Jack gestured toward the cafe area. Let's sit. They followed him to a round table, the same one where they had often sat mocking him. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. You know something I learned in service? Jack began, his voice gentle but carrying the weight of experience. People often assume the loudest ones have the strongest hearts. But true strength? He smiled slightly. It whispers. Eddie nodded slowly, understanding in his dark eyes. Like in triage, sometimes the quiet ones are fighting the hardest battles. Exactly. Jack leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. Which is why I'd like to ask for your help. The children's reading program needs volunteers, veterans who can share not just stories, but wisdom. Buck's eyebrows shot up. Us? Reading to kids? Who better? Jack's eyes held a glimmer of warmth. You know about courage, about loyalty. These children need to learn those values from men who've lived them. Tom stroked his chin thoughtfully. Never thought of myself as a storyteller. Every soldier is a storyteller, Jack replied. It's not about war stories. It's about sharing experiences that teach empathy, leadership, and understanding. Ray's face brightened. Like when we help at the church youth group? Those kids always want to hear about teamwork and overcoming challenges. Precisely, Jack nodded. And your experiences bring those lessons to life. The men exchanged glances, a new respect dawning in their eyes. Here was the man they dismissed as soft, teaching them about a different kind of service. I'm in, Eddie said firmly. My granddaughter would love this. Count me in too, Buck added, a genuine smile replacing his usual smirk. Might even dust off my old puppet-making skills from Boy Scout days. Over the next hour, they planned the program together. Jack shared his insights on connecting with young readers, while the veterans suggested ways to incorporate lessons about courage and community service. The morning light grew stronger, warming the space between them with new understanding. As the library's regular opening time approached, other patrons began arriving. They paused in surprise, seeing the veterans and Jack engaged in animated conversation, Tom sketching out ideas on a napkin, while Ray and Buck arranged chairs for the children's area. Word spread quickly through the small town. By afternoon, the library hummed with activity. Children gathered around Eddie as he read The Little Engine That Could, his voice giving life to the story of persistence. Buck had kids giggling as he acted out characters with handmade paper puppets. Tom and Ray took turns leading discussions about leadership and teamwork, their military experience lending weight to simple but powerful messages. Jack moved among them, offering quiet guidance and support. He watched as tough veterans softened before young, eager faces. Watched as children who had been shy about reading found courage in the presence of these gentle warriors. The library had become more than a place of books. It was becoming a bridge between generations, between different kinds of strength. Parents lingered longer than usual, watching their children interact with the veterans. Even teenagers, typically glued to their phones, found themselves drawn into discussions about real-world courage and compassion. As evening approached, Jack began his closing routine. The veterans helped stack chairs and organize books, their movements now in natural harmony with the library's rhythm. They made plans for the next day's sessions, their enthusiasm genuine and growing. Just as Jack was checking the front doors, he noticed movement across the street. A man stood in the shadows of the maple trees, camera in hand, lens pointed toward the library. When their eyes met briefly, the man quickly turned away, disappearing into the growing dusk. Jack locked the door, his expression thoughtful but unchanged. Behind him, the veterans' voices echoed as they gathered their belongings, planning tomorrow's stories. Their laughter mixed with the soft rustling of pages and the quiet hum of the building settling into night. The autumn morning wrapped around Jack and Lily like a cool blanket as they walked hand in hand down Maple Street toward her elementary school. Fallen leaves crunched beneath their feet, and Lily hopped from one patch to another, making up a game as she went. "Look, Daddy, I'm only stepping on the red ones," she announced proudly, her backpack bouncing with each leap. Jack smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good strategy, sweetheart, but watch out for that yellow one, it's trying to trick you." His smile seemed a touch too forced, his eyes lingering a moment too long. Jack nodded politely and kept walking. Outside the coffee shop, Mrs. Thompson and her friend quickly turned away when Jack looked in their direction. Lily, caught up in her leaf-jumping game, didn't notice. but Jack felt each stare like a physical weight on his shoulders. "Daddy, can we get hot chocolate after school today?" Lily asked, squeezing his hand. "Of course we can, Princess." Right after Jack paused as two men across the street stopped their conversation to watch them pass. He took a deep breath and continued. "Right after your homework is done." At the school gates, Lily gave him a tight hug. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart. Have a wonderful day." Jack watched her skip into the building before turning toward the library. The morning air felt heavier now, charged with unspoken questions. The library was quiet when he arrived, just as he preferred it. He was sorting through the morning's book returns when the front door chimed. A man in his early 30s walked in, wearing a pressed shirt and carrying a leather messenger bag. His smile was practiced, professional. "Mr. Ellison? I'm Calvin Morse from the Regional Times." He extended his hand. "I'm working on a feature about veterans in small towns. Would you have a moment to chat?" Jack carefully placed the last book on his cart. "I appreciate the interest, Mr. Morse, but I prefer to keep my focus on the library." Calvin's smile didn't waver. Of course. But surely you'd agree that your unique perspective transitioning from military service to community service could inspire others? "There are many veterans with inspiring stories," Jack replied evenly. "The men who come here daily would be happy to share theirs." Calvin took a step closer, lowering his voice. "But none quite like yours." Ghost hand. Jack's expression remained neutral, but his shoulders tensed slightly. "Mr. Morse, if you'll excuse me, I have patrons waiting." As Jack turned away, Calvin called after him. "Don't you think the public deserves to know the truth about Operation Shadowfall?" Before Jack could respond, Tom and Eddie appeared from between the bookshelves, their faces stern. "Is there a problem here?" Tom asked, his voice gruff. Calvin held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Just having a friendly conversation about public interest stories." "Seems more like harassment to me," Eddie growled. "Gentlemen," Calvin reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. "I've been investigating military archives. There are records suggesting civilian casualties in certain classified operations that coincide with the deployment of a particular Special Forces operative." He glanced meaningfully at Jack. The tension in the room thickened. Tom stepped forward, but Jack placed a gentle hand on his friend's shoulder. "Mr. Morse," Jack said quietly, "whatever story you think you've found, remember that partial truths can be more dangerous than lies." Calvin tucked the folder away. "Truth doesn't stay buried, Mr. Ellison. One way or another, it always finds its way to the surface." He handed Jack his business card. "When you're ready to tell your side, call me." After Calvin left, Tom turned to Jack. "Want us to look into this guy?" Jack shook his head. "It'd be. Sometimes the hardest battle is choosing not to fight." The day passed slowly, each tick of the clock echoing with Calvin's words. When evening came, Jack was grateful to head home, where Lily's presence always helped ground him in the present. That night, as Jack tucked Lily into bed, she clutched her stuffed elephant tightly. Her small voice broke the comfortable silence. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Were you a bad guy?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Jack sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. He looked at his daughter's innocent face, illuminated by her butterfly nightlight, and swallowed hard. "Sometimes," he said gently, "doing good looks bad to people who don't know the whole story." The morning newspaper landed on Jack's front porch with a heavy thud. The headline screamed across the front page in bold letters: "Local librarian tied to secret kill missions in Afghanistan." Below it sat a grainy photo of a younger Jack in combat gear, his face half hidden beneath camouflage paint. Jack's phone buzzed. Again, the 7th time in 30 minutes. Unknown number. He let it ring, watching steam rise from his untouched coffee cup. Lily was still asleep upstairs, and he wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking time in a world that had suddenly tilted sideways. Another call. This time from Sandra Mitchell, head of the library board. "Jack, I'm so sorry, but we need you to come in right away. Emergency meeting at 9. The library boardroom felt smaller than usual. 14 faces stared at Jack as he entered, their expressions ranging from concern to outright suspicion. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows seemed harsh and unforgiving. "This is a PR nightmare," Howard Barnes, one of the board members, declared, slapping the newspaper onto the table. "We can't have this kind of attention. What parent will want their children around someone with a history like this? A decorated veteran's history?" Tom's voice boomed from the doorway. He stood there with Ray, Buck, and Eddie behind him, all wearing their old military jackets. "You mean a hero's history? This isn't about his service." Patricia Weber cut in, her lips pressed thin. "It's about transparency. These allegations of civilian casualties." "Allegations?" Eddie spat the word. "From some hack reporter digging through half-redacted files he probably doesn't even understand." The room erupted into overlapping voices. Jack sat quietly, his hands folded on the table. Each raised voice sent him deeper into memories he'd fought to contain the thunder of helicopter rotors, the weight of decisions that cost lives, the faces of men who never came home. "We need to suspend him," Howard insisted, "just until this is cleared up." Sandra raised her hands for quiet. "Please, everyone. Jack, do you have anything to say?" Jack looked at each face around the table. "I've served this library and this community faithfully for 5 years. My past is complex, yes, but it's never interfered with my duties here. But these accusations," Howard started. "Are exactly that," Ray interrupted. "Accusations. You want to punish a man based on some reporter's wild theories?" The meeting dragged on for 2 hours. When Jack finally emerged, his phone showed 3 missed calls from Lily's school. His heart dropped. He found Lily in the school counselor's office, her eyes red and puffy. "They said you hurt people, Daddy," she whispered as he knelt beside her chair. "Tommy Miller said you're a bad person who kills people." Jack gathered her into his arms, feeling her small body shake with sobs. Other parents in the hallway whispered and pointed, quickly looking away when he glanced in their direction. Back home, Jack sat with Lily on their living room couch, her favorite stuffed elephant clutched tight against her chest. "Sometimes people say mean things when they're scared or don't understand," he explained gently, stroking her hair. "But why are they scared of you, Daddy? You're not scary. You read stories to kids and help old Mrs. Peterson find her mystery books." Jack smiled sadly. "Before I was a librarian, I had a different job, a hard job, protecting people. Sometimes protecting people means making difficult choices. Did you hurt bad guys? I did what I had to do to keep other people safe. But the truth is complicated, sweetheart. What matters is who we choose to be today, right now. Will people keep being mean? The truth always comes out in the end, honey. It might take time, but it always does. And the truth is that everything I did to make the world safer for children like you." That evening, after tucking Lily into bed, Jack returned to the library. The building stood silent and dark, except for the security lights. He made his way to the War Memorial display, a glass case filled with medals, photographs, and memories of local veterans. His fingers traced the cool glass until they found what they were looking for, a tarnished dog tag hanging among dozens of others. The metal still held the impression of countless sandstorms and sleepless nights. "Ellison, maybe it's time they know what really happened," he whispered to the empty room. The silence held his words, weighted with years of classified missions and hard choices. The memorial's glass reflected his face back at him, no longer the hardened operative of his past, but not quite the simple librarian everyone had thought him to be either. Somewhere between those two men, lay the truth. The moon cast long shadows through Jack's bedroom window as he tossed in his sleep. His hands clutched at the sheets, knuckles white, as memories he'd locked away for years crashed through his carefully built walls. In his dream, the Afghan mountains loomed dark against a blood-red sky. The air smelled of burning wood and cordite. Radio chatter crackled in his ear, voices tight with tension. Ghost 6. Maintain position. Intel retrieval is primary objective. Do not engage. Repeat. Do not engage. Jack crouched behind a crumbling stone wall. His team spread out in the shadows around him. The village below them burned, flames licking at the night sky. Through his scope, he could see enemy fighters moving between buildings, but something else caught his attention. Movement in a window of the school building. Small faces, terrified children huddled together. "Sir," whispered Martinez, his second in command. "Building structure is compromised. 10 minutes, maybe less, before it comes down." Ghost 6. Confirm position. Jack's throat tightened as he watched a support beam crack, showering sparks. The children's faces disappeared from the window, but he could hear their cries even over the gunfire. "Go 6, respond." His hand tightened on his rifle. 8 years of following orders, of being the perfect soldier, the ghost who slipped in and out without leaving traces. 8 years of pushing down his humanity in service of the mission. "Sir?" Martinez's voice shook. "Those kids." Jack made his decision. Team new objective. Martinez, take Brooks and secure that intel. Reynolds, covering fire. The rest, with me. Go 6. What's your status? Jack clicked his radio off. The weight of his weapon felt heavier than usual as he moved through the shadows, his team falling in behind him with practiced silence. The heat from the flames pressed against them like a physical wall. A burst of gunfire erupted from their left. Reynolds' rifle answered, precise and deadly. Through the chaos, Jack led his men to the school's rear entrance. The building groaned above them, timbers splitting. 2 minutes, tops, his demolitions expert warned. Inside, smoke burned their eyes. Jack hand-signaled his team to split up. He took the stairs 2 at a time, the metal hot through his gloves. Down the hall, children's voices cried out. In Pashto, he found them in a classroom, 7 children and 2 teachers, trapped by fallen debris. The youngest couldn't have been more than 6, Lily's age now. Their eyes went wide at his appearance, his face obscured by gear and war paint. "We're here to help," he said in their language, extending his hand slowly. "Come with me if you want to live." The building shuddered. One of the teachers stepped forward, speaking rapidly to the children. They moved as a group, following Jack's lead. His team met them on the ground floor, each soldier scooping up a child. They cleared the building just as the roof caved in. The night erupted in gunfire. Enemy fighters had spotted them. Jack's team moved in formation, shielding their charges with their bodies. Reynolds provided cover, his rifle singing its deadly song. Martinez's voice crackled through the radio he'd left on. "Intel secured. Exfil route compromised. Need immediate assistance." Jack looked at the children safely behind, their defensive line, then at the burning village where his men needed him. He split his team again, sending half to escort the civilians, while he led the rest to Martinez's position. What followed was a blur of muzzle flashes, explosive thunder, and the metallic taste of adrenaline. They fought their way out, every man carrying wounds but alive. The intel was secured. The children were saved. But the official report told a different story. Unauthorized engagement, compromise of covert operation, civilian presence in combat zone. The mission was classified, the truth buried under redactions and military doublespeak. Jack jerked awake, his t-shirt soaked with sweat. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed 4 a.m. in harsh red numbers. His heart hammered against his ribs as the dream memories faded. He sat up slowly, running a hand over his face. Down the hall, he could hear Lily's soft breathing through her partially open door. The sound anchored him, pulled him back to the present. The reporter's accusations echoed in his mind. Civilian casualties. He'd spent years protecting civilians, breaking rules to save lives, and now his past was being twisted into something dark and ugly. Jack padded quietly to his study, opening his laptop. The screen's blue light illuminated his face as he created a new document. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment. This wasn't for the reporters or the town gossips. This wasn't even for the veterans who judged him without knowing his story. This was for Lily, so that someday she'd understand why her father chose books over bullets, why he taught her that kindness was the greatest form of courage. He began to type, "Peace is the hardest mission." The words hung on the screen, a simple truth that had taken him years of war to learn. The cursor blinked steadily, waiting for what would come next. Morning light crept through the library windows, casting long shadows across the empty reading room. Jack sat at his desk, his eyes rimmed with dark circles, a cup of coffee growing cold beside him. His usually neat appearance showed signs of a sleepless night, his collar slightly wrinkled, his normally well-combed hair somewhat disheveled. Tom Harris arrived first, followed by the other veterans. They found Jack methodically sorting through returned books, his movements precise but weary. The familiar military bearing was there, visible now that they knew to look for it. "Rough night?" Tom asked, his gruff voice gentler than usual. Jack nodded, setting down a book. Memories don't always let you sleep. The veterans gathered around his desk, pulling up chairs from nearby tables. The library wouldn't open for another hour, and the quiet space felt like a confessional. "You don't have to tell us anything," Ray said, but his eyes showed genuine concern. Jack took a deep breath. "Actually, I think I do." He rubbed his face with both hands, then looked at each man in turn. "That mission? They're talking about in the papers it wasn't what they think." The veterans leaned forward as Jack's voice dropped lower, heavy with memory. "We were supposed to gather intelligence from a village near Kandahar. Simple in-and-out operation, but intelligence was wrong. There were civilians everywhere, families, children." Tom's weathered face grew serious as Jack continued. "Then the shooting started. Not from us local insurgents using the village as cover. They'd rigged several buildings to blow if we tried to advance." Jack's hands trembled slightly as he picked up his coffee cup. "I heard the children first, screaming from inside one of the targeted buildings. Orders were to hold position," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Wait for air support, but there wasn't time. I could see the timer on the explosives through my scope." Eddie, who'd been silent until now, cursed softly. "You went in." Jack nodded. "Broke formation. Ignored direct orders. Got 8 children and 3 women out before the building collapsed." He paused, swallowing hard. "Lost my radio in the process. Command thought I'd gone rogue, engaging targets without authorization. By the time communications were restored, the official report was already filed." "Jesus, Jack," Tom breathed. "Why didn't you fight it? Clear your name?" "The mission was classified. Speaking about it meant compromising other ongoing operations. And honestly," Jack looked down at his hands, "I was tired. My wife was sick. Lily needed me. Sometimes the right thing isn't fighting, it's knowing when to walk away." The veteran sat in stunned silence. Then Tom stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Well, we're not walking away. This ends now." Over the next hour, they hatched a plan. Tom made calls to his old military contacts. Ray, who knew the local newspaper editor, promised to get their side of the story out. Buck and Eddie started organizing what they called the Library of Heroes event. "It's not just about clearing your name," Tom explained, his eyes bright with purpose. "It's about showing people what real courage looks like in and out of uniform." Jack tried to protest, but the veterans wouldn't hear it. They spread out through the library, making calls, sending emails, rallying support. By mid-morning, the plan was in motion. "We're thinking next Saturday," Tom said, showing Jack the rough outline. Veterans and civilians, sharing stories about courage in everyday life. Teachers who changed lives. First responders. Regular folks who stood up when it mattered. "And you'll speak last," Eddie added, holding up a hand when Jack started to object. "People need to hear this, Jack. Not just about that mission, about what you did after. How you chose books over bullets. How you're raising your daughter to understand that bravery isn't just about fighting." Jack looked around at these men soldiers he'd once avoided, who'd once mocked him, and saw the same determination he'd once seen in his own unit. "I'm not good at speeches," he said finally. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "Just tell the truth. That's all anyone needs to hear." As they worked out the details, more veterans began arriving. Word had spread quickly through their network. Each one had a story about how the library and Jack's quiet guidance had helped them find their way back to civilian life. Private Darren Brooks showed up looking ashamed. "I'm sorry about the file, sir," he said to Jack. "I didn't think—" "You did what you thought was right," Jack interrupted gently. "That's all any of us can do." By lunchtime, the event was taking shape. The library board, swayed by the sudden outpouring of community support, gave their approval. Local businesses offered to cater. A retired judge volunteered to speak about the importance of looking beyond headlines to find truth. Tom pulled Jack aside as the others left to spread the word. The old Green Beret's eyes were wet as he gripped Jack's arm. "You're not just a soldier, Jack. You're what we all wish we could have become after the war." Jack started to respond, but Tom wasn't finished. "We came home looking for fights, carrying our wars with us. You came home and built peace. There's more courage in that than in any firefight I've ever seen." The Crestwood Public Library had never been so full. American flags hung from the ceiling, their gentle ripples casting dancing shadows across the faces below. Every available chair was occupied, with people standing 3 deep along the walls. The usual library quiet had given way to a low, expectant murmur. Lily darted between the rows of chairs, her pink sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. She worked alongside Tom and the other veterans, making sure every seat was perfectly aligned. Her face glowed with purpose as she straightened a crooked chair back. "A little to the left, Eddie," she called out, directing the burly veteran with the authority of a tiny drill. "Sergeant." Eddie complied with an amused salute, and Ray chuckled nearby. "Yes, ma'am," Eddie said, adjusting the chair. "You're as demanding as your old man." Lily beamed at the comparison, then hurried off to help Buck arrange programs on empty seats. The paper rustled as she placed each one with careful precision. The makeshift stage area had been set up near the reference section, with a simple podium borrowed from the town hall. A large banner reading "Library of Heroes Stories of Courage" hung behind it, slightly crooked despite Tom's best efforts to level it. As the scheduled time approached, veterans of different ages began taking their seats. Some wore formal military dress, others simple civilian clothes. Their faces reflected various emotions: anticipation, nervousness, and for some, a hint of apprehension about sharing their stories. Tom stepped up to the podium first, his weathered hands gripping its edges. "Welcome to our first Library of Heroes event," he began, his latter voice carrying authority despite a slight tremor. "Today isn't about war stories. It's about the courage it takes to come home." One by one, veterans took their turn at the podium. A young woman in wheelchair spoke about finding strength through physical therapy. An elderly man shared how his grandchildren's love helped him cope with PTSD. Each story drew knowing nods, quiet tears, and supportive applause. Buck talked about his struggle with alcohol after returning home, his voice breaking as he described how a fellow veteran's intervention saved his life. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, he concluded, wiping his eyes. Ray spoke of sleepless nights and how he found peace in gardening. "My roses don't care about my nightmares," he said, drawing gentle laughter from the crowd. "They just need tending, just like we all do." Throughout it all, Jack sat quietly in the front row, Lily's small hand clasped in his. She squeezed his fingers whenever someone's story made him tense up, her instincts unfailing when it came to her father's emotions. Calvin Morse sat near the back, his reporter's notebook open but mostly empty. His pen moved occasionally, but his eyes remained fixed on the speakers, his expression increasingly troubled. Finally, Tom returned to the podium. "Our last speaker today is someone who reminds us that courage comes in many forms. Jack Ellison, would you share with us?" The room fell silent as Jack stood. He walked to the podium with that quiet grace that had always marked his movements, though few had understood its source until now. Lily watched him with proud eyes, sitting up straighter in her chair. "I'm not here to defend my past," Jack began, his voice soft but clear, "or to explain classified missions. I'm here to talk about the hardest mission I've ever faced, coming home." He paused, his hands resting lightly on the podium. "We train for combat. We prepare for physical challenges. But nothing prepares you for the weight of memories or the challenge of finding peace with your choices." The room remained absolutely still as Jack continued. "I've learned that the hardest mission isn't the one where you face enemy fire. It's not the one where you have to make impossible choices in impossible situations." He looked out at the faces before him, his voice growing stronger. "The hardest mission is forgiving yourself." Several veterans nodded, wiping their eyes. Even the civilians in the room seemed to lean forward, caught by the quiet intensity of his words. "I chose to become a librarian because books taught me something vital, that every story has multiple perspectives, that truth is often more complex than headlines suggest, and that healing sometimes means turning the page without having all the answers." Jack's gaze found Lily in the crowd. "My daughter once asked me if I was a bad guy. I told her that sometimes doing good looks bad to people who don't know the whole story, but what I've learned is that the whole story isn't just about what we did in combat. It's about who we choose to become afterward." The silence in the room had transformed from expectant to profound. Even the usual creaks and whispers of the library building seemed muted. "Real bravery," Jack continued, his voice gentle but firm, "isn't about how many missions you've completed or medals you've earned. It's about facing each new day with hope. It's about choosing kindness when bitterness would be easier. It's about believing that our past actions don't have to define our future choices." As he finished speaking, the applause began slowly, then built to fill the entire library. People rose to their feet, their faces showing not just appreciation but understanding. The veterans who had once mocked him were the first to stand, their eyes shining with respect and recognition. Lily ran to her father as he stepped down from the podium, throwing her arms around his waist. Jack lifted her up, holding her close as the applause continued around them. In the back of the room, Calvin Morse sat motionless, his notebook forgotten in his lap. His face showed the conflict of a man whose certainties had been shaken. The sound of his phone buzzing broke his reverie. As the applause still echoed through the library, he glanced down at the screen. One new email. The subject line read, "Ghost hand footage, unedited." Calvin's eyes widened as he stared at his phone, the weight of what this might mean settling heavily on his shoulders. The evening news theme music filled living rooms across Crestwood. Families settled into their sofas, TV dinners balanced on their laps. The local anchor's grave expression filled the screen. "Tonight, we bring you an exclusive investigation into a decorated military operative now living among us," she began. "What our investigation reveals may shock you." Calvin Morse's face appeared next, standing outside the library. Behind these quiet walls, he said, gesturing dramatically. Lies a dark story of violence and civilian casualties in Afghanistan. The screen flickered to grainy footage, heavily edited and stripped of context. Shadows moved through smoke. Gunfire echoed. A figure that could have been Jack appeared briefly, weapon raised. The footage cut and spliced, creating a misleading narrative of chaos and destruction. At home, Lily sat cross-legged on their living room floor, her homework forgotten as she watched her father's face appear on screen. Jack stood behind her, his hand steady on her shoulders. Sources confirm that Jack Ellison, known by the codename Ghost Hand, was involved in operations that resulted in significant civilian casualties. Calvin's voiceover continued. The footage showed buildings burning, women crying. While serving as an elite operative, Ellison's unit was linked to controversial engagements that raised serious questions about civilian protection protocols. Lily's small hands gripped her father's. That's not what happened, right, Daddy? No, sweetheart, Jack said softly. But sometimes people only see what they want to see. The phone started ringing immediately after the broadcast. Jack let it go to voicemail. Text messages flooded in, some supportive, others accusatory. Through their front window, he could see neighbors peeking through their curtains. The next morning, the library felt different. The usual morning rush of parents and children had dwindled to a trickle. Those who did come in avoided eye contact with Jack, hurrying past his desk. The donation box for the children's reading program sat empty. By mid-morning, Margaret Wheeler, the head of the library board, called Jack into her office. Her usually warm face was pinched with worry. Jack, we've received dozens of concerned calls from parents, she said, shuffling papers on her desk. The board feels, well, until we can get official clarification about these allegations, we think it's best if you take a blamed leave of absence. Jack nodded, his face calm despite the storm in his chest. I understand. We'll need your keys, Margaret added softly, unable to meet his eyes. As Jack cleared his desk, he could hear whispers from the few patrons present. A mother quickly ushered her children away as he passed. The Veterans Corner, usually bustling with activity, stood empty and accusatory. At Crestwood Elementary, Lily's day was even harder. During recess, she sat alone on the swings, trying to ignore the stares and whispers. My mom says your dad killed innocent people, a boy named Trevor announced loudly across the playground. She says he's a murderer. Lily's lower lip trembled, but she held her head high, just like her father had taught her. You don't know anything about my daddy, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. Back at the library, Tom and the other veterans arrived, their faces red with anger when they heard about Jack's suspension. This is bull, Buck exploded, pounding his fist on a reading table. We're gonna find that reporter and show him what happens when you mess with one of our own. No, Jack's quiet voice cut through their anger. He stood in the doorway, having returned to collect the last of his things. No vengeance, not anymore. But Jack, Ray protested. What that snake did with that footage, it's all lies. We can't let him get away with it. Jack walked over to the military history section, running his fingers along the spines of books he'd carefully curated. I've seen what vengeance does, he said softly. It doesn't heal anything. It just makes more wounds. Eddie stepped forward, his weathered face concerned. Then what do? We can't just let them destroy you like this. We wait, Jack replied. Truth has its own timing. He turned to his former critics, now his strongest defenders. Promise me, no confrontations, no threats. That's not who we are anymore. The veterans exchanged frustrated looks, but nodded. Reluctantly, they understood the power of an order given by someone they respected. As the day drew to a close, Jack walked through the drizzling rain to pick up Lily from school. She was waiting under the covered walkway, her Pokemon backpack clutched tight against her chest. When she saw him, she ran into his arms. Can we go home now, Daddy? She asked, her voice small. Yes, sweetheart, he answered, taking her hand. We can go home." They walked through the gentle rain, past shops where people quickly turned away from their windows, past the cafe where Jack used to get his morning coffee, past neighbors who suddenly found their lawns fascinating. The town's lights seemed dimmer somehow, as if the whole world had been muted by suspicion and fear. Lily squeezed his hand. "I know you're good, Daddy," she whispered. "Even if they don't." Jack squeezed back, grateful for the pure faith of his daughter's heart. The rain continued to fall, soaking through their jackets, but neither of them hurried. Sometimes, Jack knew, you just had to walk through the storm to get to the other side. Morning sunlight crept through the library windows, but it brought no warmth. Jack stood at his desk, methodically placing books and personal items into a cardboard box. His movements were careful, precise, the same controlled efficiency that had once marked his military career. The photograph of his late wife was the last item he wrapped in tissue paper, his fingers lingering on the frame. Tom Harris and Ray Monroe worked silently nearby, helping to clear shelves and pack files. The usual morning banter was absent, replaced by the soft thud of books and the rustle of packing paper. Every few minutes, one of the veterans would glance at Jack, their faces etched with concern and barely contained anger. "You don't have to do this, Jack," Ray said quietly, placing another stack of children's books into a box. "We can fight this." Jack shook his head, managing a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes the best way to protect what matters is to step away. He glanced toward the children's reading corner where Lily sat curled up with her favorite book, trying to look brave, but failing to hide her trembling lower lip. Later that afternoon, in their small house on Maple Street, Jack knelt before Lily as she clutched her stuffed bear. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about something important." His voice was gentle, steady despite the ache in his chest. "I think it's time for us to find a new home." "But Daddy, I don't want to leave." Lily's eyes welled with tears. "My friends are here, and my school, and my books at the library." She hugged her bear tighter. "This is where Mommy's garden is." Jack pulled her close, feeling her small shoulders shake with sobs. "I know, baby. I know." He stroked her hair, remembering how her mother used to do the same. "Sometimes we have to be brave and make hard choices." Across town, in the back room of the Veterans Exace Hall, Tom spread out printed screenshots from Calvin's broadcast. Ray leaned over his shoulder, squinting at the timestamps. "Look here," Tom pointed to a series of frames. "The metadata doesn't match up. These segments, they're spliced together from different sources." His finger traced the inconsistencies in the footage quality. Eddie, another veteran who joined their investigation, nodded grimly. "The audio's been tampered with too. Listen." He played a clip through his laptop, highlighting the subtle shifts in background noise that wouldn't be obvious to casual viewers. Ray pulled out his reading glasses, examining the documents more closely. Who would go to this much trouble to frame Jack? "Someone with access to classified footage," Tom muttered, shuffling through more papers. "But look at this. The file properties show editing timestamps from last week, all linked to an IP address that traces back to Calvin's news station." Eddie finished, his face darkening, but he had to get the original footage from somewhere. They worked through the afternoon, piecing together a trail of digital breadcrumbs. Tom's military intelligence training kicked in as he cross-referenced dates, locations, and mission records that were publicly available. "Here's something," Ray called out, waving a printout. The metadata shows the original files came through an encrypted email. Calvin's source, whoever they are, they knew exactly what they were doing. Back at the library, Jack finished packing the last box. The building felt hollow now, like a shell of its former warmth. He paused at the military history corner, where just days ago veterans had read stories to wide-eyed children. His fingers brushed the spine of a book about courage under fire. Lily appeared at his side, slipping her small hand into his. "Daddy, why do people believe the bad things if they're not true?" Jack crouched down to her level, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people see what they expect to see." rather than what's really there. But the truth has a way of coming out, even if it takes time. That evening, as shadows lengthened across Crestwood, Tom sat in his study, surrounded by evidence of the manipulation. His computer screen glowed with technical analysis reports, each one confirming their suspicions about the footage's authenticity. The old soldier reached for his phone, his weathered fingers dialing Ray's number. The line clicked after 2 rings. "Ray? It's Tom. We've got it. Proof the footage was doctored." His voice was gruff with emotion. "Jack didn't just save our pride. He saved lives. We owe him the truth. What's our next move?" Ray's voice crackled through the speaker. Tom glanced at the wall where his own military citations hung, remembering the weight of duty and honor. "We bring this evidence to light. All of it. Jack stood alone in that village, choosing to save those kids instead of following orders. He's standing alone now. Not anymore." The call ended, leaving Tom in the quiet of his study. Through his window, he could see the library's roof in the distance, dark against the evening sky. The same library where they'd once mocked a quiet man who'd carried more courage in his silence than they'd recognized. Outside, the streets of Crestwood were growing quiet. Porch lights winked on one by one, casting pools of yellow light onto neat lawns and sidewalks. In his temporary apartment, Jack tucked Lily into bed, kissing her forehead and promising tomorrow would be better. Neither knew that across town, a group of veterans were assembling evidence that would change everything. Pieces of truth coming together like a puzzle in the night. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed in Ray's garage as Tom Harris hunched over a folding table, squinting at a laptop screen. It was barely 5 a.m., and the morning air held a crisp chill that made his coffee steam more than usual. Around him, 3 other veterans crowded the 5. Makeshift command center they'd assembled, a collection of borrowed computers, printouts, and notebooks spread across old metal tables. "Here's another timestamp that doesn't match," Ray Monroe said, tapping his pen against a yellow legal pad. His reading glasses sat low on his nose as he compared military operation logs with the footage Calvin had broadcast. "The metadata shows edits from 3 different days." Tom nodded, his weathered face tight with concentration. "Eddie, what did your contact at the base say about the original mission files?" Eddie, still in his postal worker uniform from his night shift, lifted a thick manila envelope. "Got the official after-action reports. Right here. Took some string pulling, but my buddy in records came through." He pulled out several papers, careful not to disturb their order. "The enemy casualty count Calvin used. It's from an airstrike that happened 6 miles away. Different operation entirely. Letting in strips of dawn light that cut across their improvised investigation board. Photos, timelines, and newspaper clippings covered one wall, connected by red yarn like something from a detective movie. At the center was the freeze frame from Calvin's broadcast, the moment that had destroyed Jack's reputation. "Look at this," Buck called from his corner, where he was analyzing the video frame by frame. "The smoke pattern in the background? It's duplicated. Someone copied and pasted it to make the scene look more dramatic." His computer skills, picked up in retirement to keep up with his grandkids, were proving invaluable. Tom stood up, stretching his stiff back. "We've got him. The whole story's built on manipulated evidence." He walked to the coffee maker, pouring his 4th cup of the morning. The bitter smell filled the garage, mixing with the scent of old motor oil and determination. Ray pulled up Calvin's contact information on his phone. "Should we call him now?" "Wait." Tom held up his hand. "Let's make sure we have everything documented first. This guy's a journalist. He'll want hard proof." For the next hour, they organized their findings meticulously. Eddie created a timeline showing the real sequence of events. Buck prepared side-by-side comparisons of the original and edited footage. Ray compiled statements from other soldiers who'd served with Jack, describing his character and actions in combat. The most damning evidence came from the original classified footage. In the unedited version, Jack could be clearly seen rushing into a burning building, emerging with 2 children in his arms. The gunfire in the background belonged to his team providing cover fire, not, as Calvin had implied, Jack firing at civilians. "Ready?" Tom asked, looking at his fellow veterans. They nodded grimly. Ray dialed Calvin's number, putting it on speaker. After 4 rings, a groggy voice answered. "Hello? Mr. Morse? This is Ray Monroe. We need to talk about Jack Ellison." There was a pause. "I stand by my story." "No, you don't," Tom cut in. "Because we have proof. It's wrong. Meet us at the diner in 30 minutes, or we take this straight to your editor." Another pause. Longer this time. "Fine. 30 minutes. The veterans arrived first, claiming a corner booth away from other early morning customers. They spread their evidence across the table, between coffee cups and untouched menus. When Calvin walked in, his usual confident stride was missing. He looked tired, rumpled, like he hadn't slept well since the broadcast. "Sit down," Tom said, his voice carrying the authority of a former commander. Calvin complied. For the next hour, they walked him through their findings. With each revelation, Calvin's face grew paler. When they showed him the original footage of Jack's rescue, his hands trembled slightly as he rewound it 3 times. "Your source," Ray said quietly. "Who was it?" Calvin swallowed hard. "Marcus Thorne, senior correspondent at the Herald. He's been trying to poach my position for months." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "He said he had a scoop that would make my career. I wanted to believe it so badly. I didn't dig deep enough." "You destroyed a good man's reputation," Buck said, his voice hard. "A man who risked his life to save children while following orders to maintain mission secrecy." "I know," Calvin whispered. "I know that now." He looked up at the veterans, his eyes showing real remorse. "I have to make this right. Let me publish a retraction, the full story." Tom shook his head. "First, you need to face Jack, man to man. Own up to what you did. He won't want to see me." "No, he won't," Ray agreed. "But that's exactly why you need to do it." Calvin nodded slowly, pulling out his phone. His fingers hovered over the keypad before he looked up. Could you ask him?" "I don't think he'll take my call." Tom exchanged glances with his friends before nodding. He dialed Jack's number, stepping away from the table. The conversation was brief. "He says no," Tom reported, returning to the booth. "Says there's no point in meeting." "Tell him, please," Calvin insisted, his professional facade completely gone. "Tell him I need to apologize properly, face to face." The veterans huddled together, speaking in low voices. Finally, Ray pulled out his own phone and sent a text. A minute later, it buzzed with a reply. "He'll think about it," Ray said. "That's the best you're going to get for now." Calvin stood up, gathering his notes with shaking hands. "Thank you for showing me the truth. I'll wait to hear from him." They watched him leave, shoulders slumped under the weight of guilt. The morning sun had fully risen now, streaming through the diner's windows and illuminating the evidence of Jack's innocence spread across the table. "Think he'll do right by Jack?" Buck asked. Tom nodded slowly. "Yeah. Sometimes a man needs to hit bottom before he can stand up straight again." Ray began carefully gathering their documents. "Now we just need Jack to agree to hear him out." "He will," Tom said with certainty. "That's who Jack is. The same man who ran into fire to save strangers won't turn away from a chance to save someone from their own mistakes." The morning sun painted streaks of gold across Crestwood's quiet streets. Jack Ellison sat alone on the worn wooden bench beside the war memorial, his fingers tracing the familiar names etched in stone. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and morning dew. He'd been coming here every sunrise since his suspension, finding solace in the peaceful stillness before the town awakened. Calvin Morse's footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Jack didn't turn around, but his shoulders tensed slightly. The reporter stood awkwardly for a moment, clutching a thick manila envelope, before settling onto the far end of the bench. "I didn't think you'd come," Calvin said quietly, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones we need most." Jack's eyes remained fixed on the memorial wall. Calvin pulled out several documents from his envelope, his hands trembling slightly. "I was wrong, Jack. Completely wrong." He spread out papers, showing email exchanges and metadata analysis. "I let ambition blind me. The footage was doctored, fed to me by someone who knew I'd run with it without checking thoroughly enough." Jack finally turned to face him. The morning light revealed the deep circles under Calvin's eyes, the wrinkles of sleepless nights creasing his forehead. "I'm not just sorry for the story," Calvin continued, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry for what it did to your daughter, to your life here." He gestured at the quiet library building, visible down the street. "I forgot that journalism isn't about destroying lives. It's about uncovering truth." Jack picked up one of the documents, studying it carefully. "Truth isn't always what we think it is, Calvin. Sometimes it's messy, complicated." He paused, watching a pair of birds swoop between the trees. "Like that mission. We went in thinking everything was black and white. It wasn't." "Let me fix this," Calvin pleaded. "I can run a retraction, publish the real footage." Jack shook his head gently. "Not from you. The town needs to hear it from people they trust. The veterans. They've earned that right." He stood up slowly, stretching his back. "Tom, Ray, and the others. They understand what it means to carry the weight of difficult choices." Calvin nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The evening news. I can give them airtime. Let them present the evidence themselves." He hesitated. "But Jack, you should be there too. Your voice matters." "I've never been good at defending myself," Jack said softly. "My work was always about staying invisible, letting actions speak instead of words." "Do it for Lily," Calvin said quietly. "She deserves to see her father stand tall." Jack's expression softened at his daughter's name. He remembered her tear-stained face when she'd asked if the other kids were right about him. "Maybe you're right about that part." They spent the next hour planning the broadcast, Jack's quiet wisdom tempering Calvin's journalistic instincts. As the town began to stir around them, more details fell into place. The veterans would present the technical evidence first, followed by testimonials from soldiers who'd served alongside Jack. 7 o'clock tonight, Calvin confirmed, standing up. The station's already cleared the time slot. He gathered his papers, then paused. "Jack, why did you agree to meet me after everything I did?" Jack smiled slightly, the first real smile Calvin had seen from him. "Because everyone deserves a second chance at doing the right thing. I learned that in Afghanistan, watching young soldiers make hard choices and live with them." Calvin extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Jack shook it firmly. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Tom and the other veterans gathered at the station early, reviewing their statements. Jack spent the afternoon with Lily, helping her with homework and making her favorite spaghetti dinner before leaving her with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. When Jack finally returned home that evening, exhausted but relieved, he found Lily asleep on the living room couch. She'd waited up as long as she could, her small hand wrapped tightly around his old dog tag, the one he'd given her for safekeeping years ago. He knelt beside her, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Tomorrow, we start over," he whispered. The dog tag gleamed in the soft lamplight, a symbol of both his past and their future, held safe in his daughter's trusting hands. The evening news broadcast flickered to life across hundreds of Crestwood homes. Tom, Ray, Buck, and Eddie sat shoulder to shoulder behind the curved desk. At Channel 7 News, their weathered faces solemn under the bright studio lights. They wore their old military jackets, medals gleaming. "Good evening, Crestwood," the anchor began, her voice carrying unusual weight. "Tonight, we have a special report concerning recent allegations about local librarian Jack Ellison." In living rooms throughout town, families leaned forward. At the library, a small crowd had gathered around the common room television. Jack stood in the back, one arm around Lily's shoulders. Tom cleared his throat and spoke first, his deep voice steady. "We're here to set the record straight about a man who's been wrongly accused, a fellow soldier, a hero." Ray picked up a remote and pointed it at the studio screen. "What you're about to see is declassified footage from Operation Mountain Shield, 2008. This is the complete, unedited version." The grainy video began to play. Smoke filled the screen as gunfire echoed in the background. Through the haze, a younger Jack Ellison moved with precise efficiency, leading his team through a war-torn village. His movements were careful, measured, nothing like the ruthless killer some had imagined. Then came the moment that changed everything. Two small figures darted across the frame, caught in the crossfire. Without hesitation, Jack broke formation. The camera tracked him as he sprinted toward the children, his voice clear through the audio. "Civilians, hold your fire." The footage showed Jack reaching the children just as an explosion rocked the building behind them. He threw himself over their small bodies, shielding them from the blast. The impact sent debris raining down, but Jack didn't move until the dust settled. "Those children survived," Buck explained, his voice thick with emotion. The mission was compromised, but Jack chose to save innocent lives instead of following orders blindly. Eddie leaned forward, tapping a stack of papers. "We have confirmation from military command. The civilian casualties attributed to Jack were actually from a separate incident 2 kilometers away. The records were mixed up in the chaos, and someone took advantage of that confusion." The camera panned to Calvin Morse, who sat at the end of the desk. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by visible remorse. He started, then swallowed hard. "I failed as a journalist. I wanted a big story so badly that I didn't verify my sources. I didn't question the edited footage that was sent to me." His eyes welled with tears. "Mr. Ellison, I'm sorry. I was wrong." Back at the library, people turned to look at Jack. He stood straight, his face calm as always, but his eyes glistened as he pulled Lily closer. On screen, Tom held up a formal letter. "The Department of Defense has issued a statement clarifying Jack's service record. He received a classified commendation for his actions that day. The citation reads, 'For exceptional valor and humanity in the face of extreme danger.'" Outside the Prussus library, a crowd began to gather. People emerged from their homes carrying candles and American flags. Mrs. Peterson from the flower shop, Mr. Rodriguez who owned the diner, teachers from Lily's school. The sidewalks filled with neighbors who had doubted, who had whispered, who now came to make things right. The news broadcast continued as Ray spoke directly to the camera. "Jack Ellison didn't just serve his country with honor. He showed us what real courage looks like. It's not about how many enemies you defeat. It's about holding on to your humanity when the world tries to take it away." The library doors opened, and Jack stepped out with Lily. The crowd parted, creating a path. Some people wiped tears. Others reached out to touch his shoulder, to shake his hand. "We're sorry," they said. "Welcome home." Sheriff Davies pushed through the crowd, carrying Jack's library badge. "The board voted unanimously 10 minutes ago. Your suspension is lifted, effective immediately." He pressed the badge into Jack's hand. "We need you here." Lily beamed up at her father, her small hand squeezing his. The evening air was warm with spring promise, filled with the gentle glow of candlelight and the murmur of humble apologies. Jack knelt down beside his daughter, his eyes level with hers. The same gentle strength that had saved those children years ago now showed in his smile. "See," he said softly, "truth doesn't hide forever." Around them, the crowd of neighbors drew closer, their candles forming a circle of light in the gathering dusk. The truth had finally come home to Crestwood, carried on the wings of forgiveness and wrapped in the quiet courage of a librarian who had never stopped believing in the power of peace. Morning sunlight streamed through the library windows, casting warm patterns across freshly cleaned floors. The scent of coffee and paint mingled in the air as community volunteers moved purposefully through the building. Some balanced on ladders, carefully, rolling soft cream paint over the walls, while others arranged flowers in crystal vases donated by the garden club. Jack stood in the doorway, his daughter Lily's small hand in his. His eyes took in the scene with quiet amazement. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery was arranging chocolate chip cookies on a platter. The high school football team carried boxes of new books, their Letterman jackets bright spots of color in the bustling space. "Daddy, look!" Lily pointed to where her classmates were creating a paper chain of American flags to hang across the children's section. "Can I help them?" "Of course, sweetheart." Jack squeezed her hand before letting go. He watched her skip away, her pigtails bouncing. Tom Harris approached, coffee cups in hand. "Thought you might need this." He offered one to Jack. "Still take it black?" "Some things never change." Jack accepted the cup with a grateful nod. The library doors swung open, and Mayor Robert Keene entered, followed by several town council members. The mayor's usual politician's smile was replaced by something more genuine as he approached Jack. "Mr. Ellison," the mayor extended his hand. "Or should I say, Captain Ellison?" "Just Jack is fine, sir." He shook the mayor's hand firmly. "If everyone could gather round," Mayor Keene called out, his voice carrying across the library. The bustling activity paused as people congregated in the main reading area. Lily hurried back to her father's side. The mayor cleared his throat. "Yesterday, we witnessed the power of truth. Today, we make things right." He pulled an official-looking document from his jacket. "By unanimous vote of the town council, Jack Ellison is hereby reinstated as head librarian, effective immediately." Applause erupted, echoing off the high ceilings. Jack felt Lily squeeze his hand. "But that's not all." The mayor continued. "We've also voted to rename this institution." He gestured to where two workers were carefully removing a cloth covering from the wall, behind the circulation desk. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Lily Ellison Library of Honor and Hope." The cloth fell away, revealing elegant bronze letters. Lily gasped, her eyes wide. "Daddy, that's my name." Jack knelt beside her, his throat tight with emotion. "Because you taught us all about hope, sweetheart. Just by being you." The mayor stepped forward again. "This library will stand as a reminder that true courage comes in many forms and that hope can bridge any divide." As the applause faded, the space naturally transformed into smaller groups. In the children's section, something remarkable was happening. Several veterans sat in colorful chairs, while elementary school students took turns reading to them. Buck, usually so gruff, was grinning as a small boy dramatically acted out "Where the Wild Things Are." Jack made his way to the reference desk, where Tom and several other veterans were looking over some papers. "What's this?" Jack asked, noting their focused expressions. "Been thinking," Tom said. "These kids reading to us, it's good medicine. For everyone. We were wondering if you'd help us set up something more permanent. A veterans reading mentorship program." Jack picked up one of the rough drafts they'd sketched out. "Connecting generations through stories." He read aloud. "Who better to run it than a librarian who understands both worlds?" Ray added, clapping Jack on the shoulder. The morning continued in a warm blur of activity. Jack found himself moving from group to group, accepting handshakes and quiet words of apology from those who had doubted him. He answered each with grace, understanding that healing worked both ways. Near lunchtime, he spotted Calvin, the reporter, sitting quietly in a corner, observing. The man looked uncertain until Jack walked over and offered him a cookie from Mrs. Peterson's platter. "You helped set the record straight," Jack said simply. That took courage. Still, I should have. We all should have done things differently, Jack interrupted gently. That's how we learn. Across the room, Lily was organizing a stack of veteran-themed picture books with Eddie, who was showing her how to arrange them by height, like he used to line up his platoon. Their laughter carried across the room, clear and healing. The morning light had shifted to afternoon gold when Tom found Jack in his office. The older veteran stood at attention in the doorway, his face serious. "Permission to speak freely, Captain?" Jack smiled slightly. "Always, Tom." Tom's weathered face softened as he looked around the library, taking in the scene of veterans and civilians, young and old, all sharing the space with newfound understanding. "You led us again, Captain, this time without a rifle." The evening settled softly over Crestwood as warm light spilled from Jack's modest home. Inside, the aroma of pot roast and fresh bread filled the air. Jack stood at his kitchen counter, carefully arranging plates while Lily bounced excitedly between the dining room and kitchen, making sure each place setting was perfect. "Daddy, should we put the fancy napkins out?" Lily asked, holding up the cream-colored cloth napkins her mother had loved. Jack's eyes softened. "Yes, sweetheart. Mom would have wanted us to use them for special occasions like this." The doorbell chimed, and Lily rushed to answer it. Tom, Ray, Buck, and Eddie filed in, each carrying something to contribute to the dinner. Tom held a bottle of wine, Ray brought his famous apple pie, Buck carried a basket of rolls, and Eddie clutched a tin of his sister's homemade cookies. "Something smells amazing," Buck said, inhaling deeply. "Jack's been cooking all afternoon," Lily announced proudly. "He made Mom's special pot roast recipe." A comfortable silence fell over the group at the mention of Jack's late wife. Tom cleared his throat and handed Jack the wine. "Thank you for having us over, brother." They gathered around the dining table, which Jack had extended to accommodate everyone. Lily insisted on sitting between Tom and her father, beaming as she passed the dishes around. The veterans praised Jack's cooking, and conversation flowed easily, punctuated by occasional laughter and the clink of silverware. As they finished their main course, Eddie raised his glass to good food and better company, and to brothers found in unexpected places. Ray added, nodding at Jack. The mood shifted gradually as they settled into deeper conversation. Tom leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Jack, we've all lost people, brothers in arms, but there's something different about losing someone back home while you're serving." Jack's hand tightened slightly around his glass. Lily reached over and placed her small hand on his arm, sensing the change in her father. The room grew quiet, waiting. "Sarah," Jack began, his voice soft but steady. "She was diagnosed while I was deployed. Stage 4 cancer. She didn't want me to know how bad it was. Kept telling me in her letters that she was fighting, that she'd be fine." Buck shook his head slowly. "That's tough, brother. Real tough. I was leading a critical mission when she—" Jack swallowed hard. "When she passed, the message didn't reach me until 3 days later. 3 days of her being gone, and I didn't even know." His eyes glistened in the dim light. "I was supposed to protect people, save lives, but I couldn't save her." Lily squeezed his arm tighter. "But you were helping other people, Daddy, like those children in the video." Tom leaned forward, his weathered face serious. "Your daughter's right, Jack. You were where you needed to be, doing what had to be done. Sarah knew that. She understood what it means to serve. The hardest part," Jack continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "was coming home to Lily, trying to explain why Mommy wasn't there anymore. How do you tell your 5-year-old that while Daddy was saving other children, he couldn't be there for his own family?" Ray set his glass down firmly. "Now you listen here, Jack. You didn't fail anyone. Those kids you saved, they're alive because of you. Their families are whole because of you. Sarah would be proud of that. She was always proud of you," Eddie added quietly. "I remember meeting her at that military ball years ago. The way she looked at you. She knew exactly who you were and what you stood for. Lily looked up at her father. Mom used to tell me stories about you when you were away. She said you were her hero because you helped people who needed it most. Jack wrapped an arm around his daughter, drawing her close. The veterans watched the moment with understanding eyes, each man carrying his own weight of memory and loss. Tom stood slowly, raising his glass. "To Sarah," he said solemnly, "to all those we've lost, and to peace, the bravest mission of all." "To peace," they echoed, glasses lifted in the warm light. Later, after the veterans had gone home with warm handshakes and brotherly embraces, Jack followed his usual bedtime routine with Lily. He helped her into her pajamas, braided her hair the way Sarah had taught him, and tucked her into bed. Lily's eyes were thoughtful as she settled against her pillows. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Mommy saw what you did?" Her voice was soft with wonder. "When you saved those children?" Jack sat on the edge of her bed, emotion catching in his throat. He looked at his daughter's innocent face, so much like Sarah's, and felt tears well in his eyes. A smile crossed his face, gentle, sad, and hopeful, all at once. "I think she never stopped watching," he whispered, his voice thick with love and memory. The first snowflakes of winter drifted lazily past the library windows as Jack unlocked the heavy oak doors. The brass handle felt cold against his palm, a reminder of the changing seasons. Inside, he moved quietly through the dimness, each footstep echoing in the peaceful silence. As he turned on the warm lights one by one, the library came alive under the gentle illumination. Golden light spilled across the wooden shelves, creating cozy shadows between the books. Jack paused at his desk, running his fingers along a framed photo of himself and Lily from last summer's reading festival. His daughter's smile reminded him how far they'd come. Through the front windows, he watched as Tom's pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. One by one, the veterans climbed out. Tom, Ray, Buck, and Eddie, followed by 6 young men and women in crisp military uniforms. The new recruits looked nervous, shuffling their feet in the light snow as the older veterans led them toward the entrance. "Morning, Jack," Tom called out as they entered, stamping snow from their boots. His breath formed little clouds in the cool air. "Hope you don't mind. We brought some fresh faces today. These kids are shipping out next month, and we thought they could use some wisdom from the library's finest." Jack smiled warmly, extending his hand to each recruit. "Welcome to our little sanctuary," he said softly. His gentle demeanor seemed to put them at ease, though they still stood at attention, spines straight as rulers. "At ease," Jack said with a slight twinkle in his eye. "This isn't basic training. It's story time." A few of the recruits cracked smiles at that, their shoulders relaxing slightly. They followed Jack through the library as he explained the new veterans reading program they'd established. Children's artwork decorated the walls, crayon drawings of American flags alongside pictures of soldiers reading books to smiling stick figures. "Sir," one of the young recruits spoke up, a woman with close-cropped dark hair. "We heard about what happened here, about how you turned things around. Some of us were wondering." She hesitated, wondering if the stories were true. Jack finished for her. He nodded thoughtfully. "The truest stories are rarely the ones that make headlines. They're the quiet ones, about healing, about finding your way back home." The morning light grew stronger, filtering through the windows as families began arriving with their children. Little ones in colorful winter coats bounded through the doors, their excitement filling the space with life and energy. They gathered in the reading nook, settling onto cushions and child-sized chairs while parents and veterans lined the walls. Jack picked up a worn copy of The Giving Tree from his desk. The book's green cover was soft with age and use. He sat in the old wooden rocking chair, and the children instinctively scooted closer. "This was my daughter's favorite book when she was younger," he said, opening to the first page. "It's about love, sacrifice, and what it truly means to give of yourself for others. As Jack read, his voice carried the story with gentle strength. The young recruits watched, transfixed, as he brought the tantrum tale to life. He paused occasionally to ask the children questions, drawing them into discussions about kindness and generosity. Sometimes, he explained, looking at both the children and the recruits, the bravest thing isn't charging forward, it's standing still and offering what you have to others. The tree in our story gave everything she had, not because she had to, but because she chose to love. Through the windows, they could see the town square transformed by Christmas decorations. Garlands wrapped around lampposts, and tiny white lights twinkled in the trees. The snow continued to fall, adding a layer of magic to the scene. Tom leaned against a bookshelf, watching as one of the young recruits helped a little boy sound out words in a picture book. Across the room, Eddie sat with two girls who were showing him their favorite story about a brave princess. The library had become more than just a building full of books. It was a bridge between generations, between soldiers and civilians, between past and future. As the morning progressed, Jack observed the natural mentoring taking place around him. Veterans who once stood apart from the community now sat shoulder to shoulder with families, sharing stories and wisdom. The young recruits seemed to understand something deeper about service as they watched these interactions unfold. Near lunchtime, the crowd began to thin. Parents bundled children back into winter coats, and the young recruits prepared to leave. Each one shook Jack's hand again, their eyes showing new understanding. "Thank you, sir," said the dark-haired recruit from earlier. "I think I understand now what my sergeant meant about different kinds of courage." Jack nodded, squeezing her hand. "The uniform doesn't make the soldier," he said quietly. "The heart does. Remember that when things get tough." The veterans lingered after the recruits left, helping Jack straighten up the reading area. Tom picked up a stuffed animal that had been left behind and placed it on a shelf. "You know, Jack," he said, "watching you with those kids, both the little ones and the recruits, it reminds me why we serve in the first place. It's not about the fighting. It's about protecting moments like this." The day passed quickly, filled with regular library activities and spontaneous story sessions. As evening approached, the snow continued to fall, creating a peaceful blanket over the town. Christmas lights began twinkling in the early darkness, casting multicolored reflections on the fresh snow. Jack stood at the window, watching the last patrons leave for the day. Lily appeared at his side, having just finished her homework at one of the study tables. She slipped her small hand into his, and together they began their closing routine, straightening chairs, turning off computers, checking that all books were in their proper places. As Jack reached for the light switch, he paused, taking in the quiet beauty of the library at night. The snow fell silently outside, visible in the glow of the street lamps. He thought about all that had happened here. The pain, the healing, the redemption. Looking upward at the gently falling snow, he whispered, "The bravest stories aren't the ones about fighting wars. They're the ones about finding peace." With that, he turned off the lights and locked the door. Father and daughter walked home together, their footprints marking a path in the fresh snow, the streetlights casting warm halos in the winter evening. Their joined hands swung gently between them as they walked, a soldier finally at rest. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Ellison, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.